Peter Mollins. Really excited to have you here for the introductory FORA discussion, where we're going to be talking about marketing priorities. And we're here with Ryan Kraudel, who's going to be talking with us about his priorities and what he sees at Valencell. Maybe you can just give me a quick introduction of your background, Ryan, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter, thanks a lot for having me on. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to the discussion. As Peter mentioned, my name is Ryan Kraudel. I head up marketing at a company called Valencell, and we make the biometric sensor technology that goes into wearable devices. The easy way to think about it is the green blinking lights on the back of a smartwatch or a fitness band. That's very likely our technology in some form or fashion. And so I've been with the company going on 6 years now, and have most of my background is in B2B marketing and B2B technology marketing more specifically, but most of my background was in enterprise software, and particularly in supply chain software and supply chain technology. But I've also been a huge, on a personal level, a huge consumer of wearable devices really since the very beginning. And so for me, this is a great mix of a personal passion and professional expertise.
That's great. Well, I'm looking forward to jumping in and hearing more. My wearable is charging right beside me, and I know a lot of people have that perspective too. So I'm sure they'll be interested to hear your perspective. And I know, I mean, one of the things that that really got me excited about talking to you was last time we spoke, where we spoke in the real world. We are talking about some of your event management and just the exciting things that you're able to do from a product demonstration perspective. And so
Yeah.
that'll be interesting one to explore a bit on. But before we do, let me step back and just for these FORA discussions, the aim is to really concentrate on priorities and what marketing leaders are prioritizing in terms of their focus. And so one of the things that was big for yourself was around expanding the total addressable market and getting into new markets. And so I was wanting to kind of get a sense from you about evaluating markets. Like when you're looking at how to get into a new market, starts often with evaluating. What do you look at? How do you do that evaluation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's for me, it's a combination of looking at the technology platform that we have and the applicability of that platform in different markets, and to solve different problems that that are similar, but obviously in a different context or in a different industry, but still have to where we're not we don't have to go do a bunch of new development in order to make that technology solve problems in other markets. So it's technology fit. It's of course size and growth rate of the market. And then the third thing I really look at is route to market. How do we access that market, and can we do that in a scalable way with our existing resources? Do we need to go partner for a go-to-market strategy in that market? What kind of distribution channels are available, and those kinds of questions of more the tactical go-to-market activities. If it's too much of a leap to actually get into that market and viably generate traction in that market, then that makes it that much more challenging. So it's those three elements are the primary things I look at, and then of course there's a bunch of details underneath those things.
Right.
Three things.
Right. And so your go-to-market, you're working with you're selling directly to businesses, right? So these are businesses that are going to implement in their wearables. Is that right?
Yeah. We're when we say we're in the wearables market, we're somewhat unique in that you can think of us kind of as an Intel Inside for these biometric sensors and wearables. So we don't make any of the end devices, any of the wearables themselves, but we provide the sensor technology to the device makers.
Right.
And help them integrate that into whatever device they're building, whether it's a smartwatch or a medical patch or hearing aids or earbuds, or a pretty broad range of different device form factors and use cases that the sensor technology is going into. But it is a purely B2B play, and that we're B2B to C, if you want to think about it that way, and that we provide the technology to the device makers, help them integrate it there, and then they take that product to market.
Right. Do you leverage those device partners from for when you're assessing those markets, or do you more look at like what markets they're winning in or they're active in order to understand where you want to get into?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And as an ingredient technology like this, we look, that's part of that market sizing we look at, is not just not just looking at it top down, but also looking at it bottom up to see with our go-to-market motion in being an ingredient technology company, how many companies are out there, because our business model is purely volume driven. So the more products that our customers sell with our technology in it, the
Yeah.
better we do and the better they do. So it's we've got aligned incentives along those lines, but you also have to look at how many of those companies are out there, what kind of unit volume are those companies driving, and does that model fit? Does our existing model fit for those markets in how those companies prefer to go to market with their own products?
Right.
And does our model make sense for their go-to-market model?
Right. So when you're thinking about those channels to market as another way that you'd mentioned was an important part of expanding your total addressable market, are you going through distributors, or are you selling directly to those device makers?
In most cases, we're selling directly to the device makers. And so in most of the markets that we go after, and that's just to set context, it's mostly consumer wearables. So the consumer electronics companies, the pure play wearables companies. So the consumer market more broadly, and then the health and medical market. So this is traditional med device companies, pharma and CROs, healthcare organizations more broadly. And in both of those segments, it's a very top heavy. They're very top heavy markets where you're talking the top 20% or even the top 20 companies are doing 80 to 90% of the unit volume, and in some cases that high of a percentage of the revenue.
Yeah.
And so that in that case, in top heavy markets like that, it makes more sense for us to go direct.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there's also a fairly long tail, if you will, in more of a power law distribution. There's a long tail of other companies in those markets as well. And there we look at more distribution partners,
Right.
where it makes sense for those distribution partners to address that longer tail to try to capture more of that market share.
Got it. Now, for that long tail, I imagine because you're selling an ingredient. I love that term, by the way. That's a great term. Because you're selling an ingredient to other people's recipes, like if you don't mind, then the distributors, they've got to know how, not only your technology, but kind of how to solution that technology to fit into the recipe, right? Is that a challenge for you?
That's a big challenge, and you've hit the nail on the head. It's probably our biggest challenge with those distribution partners, because it's a highly technical sale, and it's even for device makers, many of these device makers really don't understand biometric sensors like this, and
Right.
and so we've found that using those distribution partners as more of lead gen partners, and they do some initial qualification and then pull us in.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work for us to be completely hands off. And it's better for everyone if we are directly involved. Once there's qualified opportunities, then we'll come in and essentially close the sale or figure out where to go from there. But it's we've done a variety of different experimentation over the years in different distribution channels and partners, and we've always come back to, we need to be involved in the sale at some level.
Right.
And usually what works best is some level of initial qualification with those distribution partners, and then we'll come in if we think it's an opportunity that, again, for us, back to kind of the discussion around focus, is because our business is volume driven, there are certain thresholds below which the working with a partner that's not going to meet those unit volume thresholds just doesn't make sense
Right.
unless there's other reasons for working with that partner. And
Yeah.
so sometimes we've got to come in and qualify that opportunity at a different level. And sometimes we've just got to say it's not a good fit for us because it's just not, there's not enough volume there for it to make sense.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So another way to address or to expand the addressable market is really to launch new offers, and that was you mentioned that as being important. So here, if we were just to apply it to the Valencell model, thinking less about a new recipe with your existing ingredient, but thinking about a new ingredient that you could offer.
Yeah.
So how do you that a hardware technology world, is there a lot of like long lead time to create an entirely new offer, or are you able to use sort of the existing technology to reconfigure to create a new ingredient?
Yeah, great question. And so thankfully, it's more of the latter than the former. We're always evolving the hardware, but a lot of what we do and a lot of where we spend our R&D and technology development resources is really getting more out of the signal
Yeah.
that our sensors produce than has ever been possible before. And just to give you some concrete examples, our sensors and the most common use case is measuring heart rate with this type of sensor technology, whether it's in a sports watch or a smartwatch or even in audio earbuds. At a minimum, you're going to want to do heart rate, but we can also do more advanced metrics that help provide different insights into a person's physiological response. And so we can, pardon me, see things like pulse oximetry and the blood oxygenation. And our latest development is we can now measure blood pressure with this same sensor technology. So there's it's the same hardware that we're measuring heart rate in the context of a sports and fitness application that
Right.
we can use to measure blood pressure in more of a health and medical application or device. And so that's a lot of how we think about launching new offerings in different markets is what can we do with our existing hardware platform that we can add new functionality to without having to do an entire hardware refresh.
Right. Yeah. Because I imagine then that would just like exponentially increase the complexity of the go-to-market, because now you're dealing with all these other device makers, all these other markets, and now you're adding just extra complexity to each one of those segments, right?
Yeah. Well, and it also enables us to fit within existing consumer expectations now, where like with your mobile phone, you expect continual software upgrades on hardware these days. And
Right.
that enables us to be able to do that with over-the-air upgrades to the sensor technology to be able to add new features and functions within that same hardware platform.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk a bit about sort of increasing the valuation of the company, increasing the multiple, if you will, of Valencell. So
Yeah.
one of the things that it seems like it's an important strategy for you is is that being an ingredient, you want to be able to not be lost in the shuffle. Like there's important elements of Valencell that are differentiated. And so how does brand play a role when you are an ingredient versus the Apple Watch?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's one of the things we deal with continually is well, and let me take a step back. Valencell has always been focused on the highest degrees of accuracy in this technology. We're founded by three PhD research scientists, and we have always taken a very scientific approach
yeah,
to what we do. And so setting out hypotheses and going out to try to disprove those
right,
hypotheses.
right,
And what that means from a marketing standpoint, of course, is we've got to be able to back up every one of the marketing claims we put out there with extensive amounts of data and testing of the technology on real human beings.
Right.
And so that's very different from what a lot of hardware manufacturers, and particularly sensor manufacturers, the way they position their products is, here it is, good luck with integrating it into your device, and you're on your own for testing. And we've taken a much more holistic approach to being able to provide additional services around the technology. And from a valuation standpoint, that's important for a variety of different reasons. But one, it helps ensure that our customers' devices are as successful and as accurate as we expect them to be and they expect them to be. So there's aligned incentives there. But there's also it's, as you well know, all hardware ultimately gets commoditized.
Right.
And so you've got to be able to add additional value, not just for individual customers, but to the market more broadly, in being able to do more with essentially the same type of technology, kind of going back to what I was talking about a moment ago. But what that enables is, as you add new and better functionality, better capabilities, it opens up new market opportunities. So this blood pressure technology, as an example, before we had the ability to monitor blood pressure, it didn't make sense for us to go into the hypertension management space as an example of a market space where we're able to expand into. But now that does make sense, and that adds to the company valuation in being able to address not just larger target markets, but more of those markets in aggregate that demonstrate company valuation, not just in a given market segment or for a specific customer base. Obviously, the more you can broaden that customer base, the more valuable the company is.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. And I imagine it has an impact on lead generation as well. Like, do you see that brand awareness impacting inbound volumes or maybe outbound conversions? I'm not sure what.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a very long relatively long sales cycle, on the average of around 18 months. And then there's additional product development cycle. Once we sort of win the deal, there's another pretty long time frame of product development, because these hardware products take at least 12 months in terms of the product development cycle. But what's interesting about being an ingredient technology company is we get inbounds for, and we're working on devices now that you won't see in the market for another 1.5 to 2 years.
Right.
So that takes a lot of planning and a lot of rigor from an operational standpoint as a business, but it also gives us unique insights into where the market is going. Because even if these products don't, some of these products don't end up ever seeing the light of day, we understand how these companies are thinking about their product strategies and their product portfolios way in advance of that becoming public information or having additional insights there. So to your point of lead gen and inbounds, it allows us to get early insights into where the market's going and get ahead of that from a marketing and a messaging standpoint.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Because then people then start turning to you as like that aggregator of insight, right?
That's
and
right,
so then there's a valuation perspective, but also just an inbound perspective, because they're going to be looking to you for intelligence, because they're going to have one siloed view on the market, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
That's great. And just last sort of general question is around risk. So this, we're dealing with health equipment, right? I imagine there's regulatory frameworks like the FDA in the U.S. that you're dealing with. Is that a challenge for you, or what? How do you see it?
It is, and it's a relatively new challenge for us in that I mentioned a good portion of our customer base is in the consumer side of things, where there's there's relatively little in terms of regulatory considerations. But as you've probably known or noticed, or anyone who's paying attention to the wearables market, there's this convergence going on of consumer wearable devices and true health and medical devices. And so we've kind of sat in the middle of that, enabling both of those categories of companies. But if you, even the consumer guys are moving more and more towards becoming personal health devices, if not outright medical devices.
Yeah.
And so we've gotten much more involved in the regulatory considerations. And as an ingredient technology, we can't necessarily lead those regulatory efforts or regulatory approval processes, but we do need to have the documentation and the rigor in our own processes to help our customers through those FDA or other regulatory clearance processes. So we work in tandem with our customers to help get their products through the regulatory processes.
Okay, great. Well, this has been fascinating. Really enjoyed the talk. But I just want to ask you one last question, which is for any listeners that are in a similar position where it's an ingredient into a larger recipe. Any last bits of advice for a marketer in that situation that shares that with you?
Yeah, it's a unique marketing challenge in always being part of a broader solution. So
Yeah.
the one thing that we always try to have our customers keep in mind, and sometimes this seems obvious, but starting with the end in mind. And in other words, what is the user experience? What's the problem you're trying to solve with the broader solution, not just your piece of that solution, but what overall is that user experience and that problem you're trying to solve, and then being very clear about how your ingredient fits within that broader solution. And it sounds pretty obvious, but we run into this all the time of companies coming to us saying, "Oh, we need this kind of sensor or that kind of sensor," and we have to make sure they are reminded of, okay, what are you trying to accomplish overall, and let's work backwards from there to figure out what you need to measure and what you're going to use those measurements for in the context of that user experience. And then let's use that to figure out what kind of sensor technology you need in that to fulfill that user experience.
That's great. That's great advice. Well, Ryan, again, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the chance to talk and share your insights. So really appreciate it.
Thanks again, Peter. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely.